Aujourd'hui, je vais parler de this idea that as we live longer and longer, so too must our work lives, right? In fact, the article I'm reacting today basically says, hey, if you're a kid now, you'll have to work for 60 years. Oh boy, gotta love the silly media sometimes, don't you? Hey, XenPuck here. So obviously, I don't love work, right? What I love is having the freedom to do silly stuff, like these videos that are obviously poorly written, produced, edited, or whatnot. Doesn't bother me. Whatever this mess is, it is solely my own. And I'm okay with it. And over time, I'll get better at it, that is a certainty, and it doesn't feel like a burden to work on it, however slowly, okay? Alas, back in the real world, if you're not early retired, you're faced with articles like this one from The Atlantic that I will link below, okay? A title really says it all. The future of work is a 60-year career. Wow. I'm just itching to debate, or rather berate this article, so I'm gonna get to it in my few digestible points, right? Point number one, technically what this kind of sensationalist title is doing is just saying, hey, all people will likely live longer, so if we live to 100, the proportional working life might increase to 60. First of all, what an assumption, right? Have you looked at the state of the US healthcare system lately? Increasing life expectancy up to 100 is by no means a certainty, right? Okay, but that's a tangent. I digress, right? Back to this whole idea of working career years. Where are we right now in terms of years? Article quotes currently people work 40 years. I think that's actually a bit low. I mean, who's consistently retiring at 60 these days? No one I know. So I think it's more like 45, right? So again, now we think it might be going up to 60 should we ever live to 100, right? I have another complaint right off the bat, okay? Is anyone even remotely happy with 40 to 45? Who could possibly desire 15 to 20 more years? It is like absurd to me that in the richest country in the world, that all we can talk about is how everybody should be working more still, okay, not less. Whatever happened to the idea that capitalism was supposed to produce such overabundance of goods that the biggest fears for society is that its citizens would become too lazy because they don't have too much to do? What happened to that? How the heck did the bar move so low that we simply aim for working longer and longer instead? Alright. Point number two, right? I need to take a moment because that was just depressing. But to be fair, the actual article addresses the idea of extension of work life with, you know, some concepts or just like some really predictions that sounds good on paper but is totally trash were it to ever be implemented, right? The main idea is that if you're gonna work for 60 years, somehow the same amount of hours will be worked for 40 years, okay? But the hours just be more evened out. Does that sound good? You work less hours, like the average citizen would work less when they have younger children, possibly more later on in life. Okay, here's the main problem with the scenario, right? No company will pay you the same amount of money to do less work on an annual basis, okay? So if we're talking about working the same amount of hours in 60 years rather than 40 years, then capitalism will pay you the same amount over 60 years rather than 40 years. So if you take the same number and divide it by a larger number, every year you'd be paid much less. Is that what the future holds? A 20-year longer work career and less pay every year. I have never met anyone in the young adult to middle adulthood area or range that would be okay with essentially a 33% pay cut. That is utterly ridiculous. And don't give me that whole, well, the current model of overworking workers do not grant the best results either argument, okay? Because that's the only system that we actually have in this country, so how does anybody know whether any other model would produce a better result, right? Not to mention this completely ignores how people differ on how they handle stress, right? There will always be somebody who rises to the occasion and others who crack under the pressure, right? That type of competition is human nature. To assume people will just become more productive simply because they have less hours? Not a given. Just look at France and their proposal of 35-hour work week Do they stick to that? Are they on the top of productivity chart or entrepreneurial spirit anywhere in the world? Yeah, no. Haven't been in years, okay? It does not work. Just cutting hours does not work in itself. Or at least I haven't seen it. Point number 3. Finally, let me be clear. I'm not entirely anti this particular article because the author actually mentions a key fact that people forget these days, which is that the whole retirement thing that we're used to in itself is a result of monetary flexibility, right? We do that at a regular retirement age, which is somewhere in your 60s to 70s, because we can now afford to collectively as a society. And that's pretty sweet, because it literally used to be you work until you die. It's kind of harsh, right? What I find interesting is that the author knew that let's say a few hundred years ago you worked until you died, and more recently you worked until you're about 10 to 20 years prior to death, right? By this logic, shouldn't the conclusion logically be that in the future we'll be working, let's say, 50 years prior to dying? Get it? Over time, we should be getting richer, therefore can afford flexibility to do whatever we want earlier, not later in life, okay? Because that's really the logic in early retirement or financial independence, retire early, this whole movement that I keep talking about, right? I have no idea how long I'll live, but part of the reason for my exit is obviously because I wanted freedom earlier, right? You know, because I could be dead by 60 or 70. Now, rather than waiting around for a few more decades, right? Who the heck would want to work until they die? Maybe the 2% of workers in specifically creative fields, but for the rest of us, shouldn't the trajectory of capitalism have taught you to expect to be richer and retire earlier, not later? I can't stop emphasizing this very simple point, right? Anyway, you get it? That was my whole main point, right? So in conclusion, I want to ask you some questions, right? Do you really want to work longer? Do you really want to work longer for less money, right? That's combo bad. Do you really want to work until you die? Do you really want to work at anything that you didn't get to decide for yourself on a day-to-day basis? Now, if you said yes to any of these, well, you know, I really appreciate your can-do spirit and thank you so much for supporting the stock market so that I don't have to do any of those things, right? Thank you so much for just being a follower, right? Really, that's what you would be if that's your life's goal. But for the rest of us, right, or the audience, you guys really, put in some extra effort earlier in life and get out of the work grind already. 60-year career, what a joke. That is for chumps, okay? I got out after 16 years, and to be frank, I could have exited even earlier if I was educated about FIRE a little bit earlier, okay? So yeah, it's not rocket science. You too can do it. Comment, like, and sub, and all that social media nonsense down below. Or whatever, press a button. You know, if you're watching my video, I assume you're a smart person, and you could have figured all that stuff out without me having to ask you, right? Cheers. Well approached.